Ep.2
Yo, what's up, world? It's your boy Armand, and welcome to another episode of the 206. I'm joined by the co-hosts and the homies, Jason and Tim.
Hey, what's good? Just that quick check-in. Southwest representative, but original West Coaster. Got to give love to everyone out here listening, and to the land, man. We're on sacred land out here. Let's remember that too.
Yeah. Big Tim from the Sunshine Coast. If y'all ever want to visit me, bring your wet towel, tall glass of ice cold lemonade, and some bug spray. Coming at you.
For sure. So today we're going to be talking about veganism, not just as a diet, but also as a philosophy. But before we can jump into it, we have a friend that's here as a guest and the center of today's conversation, which means it's time. Introducing. This man is the proud owner of 2 stray cats and is speaking out of West Palm Beach, Florida. We have Stephen, the 6'4" herbivore Rykwalder.
Oh, God.
Welcome to the show, bro.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for that ridiculous introduction.
I must say 6'4" herbivore that was spot on.
Yeah, hey, that's his Instagram. He has that in his little Instagram bio. I was gonna stop and say it. Let me repeat that one more time for the ladies. The 6'4" herbivore. Oh my god. So I guess Stephen, you can just kick things off by letting everyone who's listening now know how you became vegan.
Okay, yeah. So I guess to go back a little ways, I guess we'll take things pretty deep, pretty quick. So when I was 19 years old, when I was 19 years old, my sister was murdered by her husband. And a few years later, I was actually in the middle of eating probably the best tasting hamburger I had ever had in my life. I was actually in West Palm for business at the time. I was living in Tampa, and we were working late hours and ordered food in. And as I was about halfway through this burger, I just start picturing the animals that I'm eating. And, about a week prior, I had seen some documentary. I don't recall the name of it. And it was nothing graphic. It was just talking about, the food industry. And there were some clips of these animals in the fields. So it was none of this graphic stuff that, you can see these days. But as this started entering my head, just picturing these animals, it just clicked for me instantly in that moment that literally to these animals, I'm no different than my sister's husband was to her. So essentially, I'm allowing them to be killed for me when I know at this point that I can survive without eating them. And it took me back to when I was about 10 years old, and probably the first time I ever really experienced significant loss. And some people might think it's crazy, but it was my first cat that I ever had. And the cat got outside and a car ran over my cat on Christmas Eve. So, while everybody's celebrating and opening presents and everything like that, all the neighbors on the street, I was just devastated because, my cat just got killed. And so I realized in that moment, as I was eating that burger and it all clicked, that I felt the same kind of pain that day when my cat died as when my sister had died when I was 19. And from that moment, like my stomach just started churning. And literally, I put the burger down, didn't even finish it because I just felt sick to my stomach and haven't touched meat ever since that day, about a little over 7 years ago now. So from that point, I had completely cut out meat, just cold turkey, no pun intended. And then about a year later, I started getting curious about what the term vegan meant. And so I started researching, and knowing me, Armand would know this. I am a very ambitious person, so I try to push myself to the highest level I can when I try to do things. So when I saw that vegan is more than what I was doing as a vegetarian, I started, looking more into it, And what I started uncovering was actually that, originally I was thinking I just want to do it for the challenge. And then I start seeing, holy crap, I'm still supporting all of these horrific things in the dairy and egg industry. And then just all the other aspects of life, the leather that I had on my clothes, on my furniture, my personal care products, all these things that I didn't even realize, really impacted the animals the way it did. So I immediately started, buying replacement items. As I would run out of things, I'd replenish with something that was vegan and cruelty free. And then eventually I got rid of all my leather items. That took some time just because I felt conflicted. I didn't want to waste. So I tried to find people that needed these items before I bought new ones. But it got to a point where I realized, even just as a spokesperson for veganism, I didn't want to be holding on to leather items anymore, because what kind of message would I be sending to other people if, I'm telling them veganism is so easy, anybody can do it, but yet I'm still keeping leather items. So that's kind of, I guess, in a nutshell, where we're at today.
Man, well, first thing I want to say here is my condolences to you for the series of just tragedies you've went through.
I appreciate that.
That is rough. And I guess if I could go first with my question is, do you think that these tragic life crises that you've gone through several times in your experiences played a role in putting you on this path towards eventually going on this lifestyle?
Yeah, no doubt. For a lot of reasons, actually. I think, especially with what happened with my sister, I think there was no justice served in that situation. And so it just paralleled what happens with these animals perfectly. She was killed violently, unexpectedly, no justice was served. And so it not only, creates this empathy in you where when you see others suffering, you're able to recognize it and understand it, and almost, suffer with that other living being. So from an empathetic perspective, it really helped shape that for me, because I've been through things that, maybe certain people have never been through. But then also just from that parallel idea of, someone you love being murdered, and then realizing this is literally what we're doing to these animals, and there's never justice for these animals either. It was just like, it just like
Right.
smacked you in the face. It just was like, wow. And so, to your question, until that point, I just couldn't understand why what happened to my sister happened. It's one of those things where you're just like, she wasn't a horrible person. She didn't deserve something like this. I mean, she had her flaws like everybody. I'm not going to act like, anybody's perfect, but, not to deserve something like that. And so, you kind of just grapple with this question of, why did this happen? And how do you recover from that? And then when I went vegan, it was the first time since then where I truly felt like I had a purpose, and that maybe, this played into it. Not to say that, my sister was killed so I could go vegan, but,
No,
but yeah,
right.
to your question, like, it really, I would say, has ended up resulting in something that has defined my life, is what I tell people now is the greatest decision I've ever made.
Powerful. Very powerful.
So kind of going along that theme of purpose, our audience can't see it, but everyone has nicknames here in the chat, and yours is Meat Free Mafia because that's the name of your company and the name of your Instagram, right? And I think for people go vegan for a lot of reasons. For you, it definitely seemed to be for emotional ones, like you really made an emotional connection to what was happening with the animals. And usually I think those are the people that become the biggest animal rights advocates and the biggest ones trying to bring about change in the animal industry. So do you want to talk about a little bit of how you got started on the path, not just as a vegan, but also as an activist?
Yeah, so it's interesting. And the name Meat Free Mafia, and why I kind of adopted that moniker and it became my persona. A lot of people don't even know my real name. They just know me as Meat Free Mafia. I would say is because, as all of you know, and your listeners probably don't, I'm very big into fitness. I was going into the FBI as a special agent, so I felt like veganism kind of had this bad reputation of almost being associated with like weakness or just people that were frail and just malnourished. So I,
Oh, 100%. That's what I thought for the longest
yeah,
time.
yeah. And so, I wanted to shift that because I felt like what better impact can I have than showing other men that are just like me that you can be meat free and still thrive and be strong and masculine and, not in a way that's like a toxic masculinity, but strength, and positive masculine features. And so Meat Free Mafia, I felt like just really encompassed that. As far as the activism and really getting more involved, I think it was a lot of just realizing how deep this issue of animal agriculture is. And then also realizing that my own resources could only go so far and my impact could only have so much reach if it was just me. So when I started Meat Free Mafia, the idea was to create catchy clothing that I could sell to other people that had messages that would basically be billboards wherever they went, because we have all this constant advertising for the animal agriculture industry in our faces to the point that most people don't even realize that that's what it is. You see advertisements for Wendy's, Burger King, McDonald's, all within a 1 mile range, and there's nothing really promoting anything for the animals. So I felt like this is a great way to do it at like a grassroots level where you have people just going out into society wearing these messages that might at least kind of pique somebody's curiosity or their interest. And if they see enough of it, then they start to research and they start to find, what's actually going on. The other side of it was that I knew if I could raise this money from selling this clothing, then money could go even further as far as helping these animals by donating to various rescues and organizations that are fighting for animal rights. So, different legal defense funds, organizations that are fighting on the legislative side, and then just organizations that try to help rescue animals and close down slaughterhouses. So, that's kind of the whole purpose behind Meat Free Mafia. And then I ended up shifting away from the clothing when I realized my platform was building and I had a captive audience where I could actually just start focusing on more of the activism side where I would, make different videos, posts, things like this that could open people's eyes and educate, whether it was on the activist side or on just the general society side, sharing and disseminating information that maybe people weren't even aware of that would impact their decisions in the future. So I also simultaneously got involved with different protests, volunteering at sanctuaries, vigils, all these kinds of things over time until I realized that ultimately I have far better reach online with my following now, that it's not really worth my time to be driving to in-person activism events when I could be spending that time researching and putting out videos online that can reach thousands of people instantly. So, yeah, that's a little bit of background on it.
Yeah, I can definitely speak to how effective the shirts are. As you know, I have I think just 2 of your shirts, but they definitely get me attention. I mean, just last week in one day at I think it was 3 different places, each person said something to me. And I think to your point as to why you also chose the name Meat Free Mafia, there's a certain stereotype about what the average vegan guy may look like. And a lot of guys, excuse me, one of the biggest reasons they have for not wanting to maybe change their diet or go vegan is if they are into fitness and being strong and kind of embodying that stereotypical strong man, they feel like they can't get a certain physique
Right.
eating a vegan diet. But when you kind of break that stereotype and people see that you are in shape, which we both are, they're like, oh, wait, what? Like they read your shirt and like, wait, are you vegan? Really? You? And then their mind is like, you don't look like a vegan. And it's definitely a conversation starter.
Yeah, totally agree. It's interesting, and that's kind of another aspect to it that you just brought up that I didn't hit on is that I think what's nice about it, and you can probably verify this, is that when you wear a shirt like that, it's enough of an interest-piquing piece that somebody else starts the conversation. And that's one of the things that people always say about vegans is why are vegans always trying to push their beliefs on people? But when someone sees that shirt, they're the one that started the conversation. So realistically, if they didn't want to have the conversation, they didn't have to say anything. And so it already puts you in an advantaged place because they came to you. And so now you're not talking to someone that's automatically on the defensive. It's someone that's already open enough that they said something to you. And like you said, like that's one of my favorite places to wear the shirts is at the gym. And it's the same reason now I have a license plate on my Jeep that says Vegan One because my Jeep looks like a military vehicle. It's all blacked out, 35-inch wheels. It has a battering ram on the front. It's got a steel bumper on the back. Like it just looks like
Dang.
a very aggressive vehicle. Yeah. And so, when people see a vegan license plate on that, it goes back to what Armand just said, where it really challenges that stereotype in somebody's head of what a vegan is. And I am the stereotype. I used to drive a Prius before. So it's like that's literally exactly what a stereotype.
Hey, dog, I
I
missed that
loved that
Prius.
Prius. I'm not gonna lie, that
A
was
lot of
that
memories in
was
that
one of my
Prius.
favorite cars. But yeah, and so
Yeah, I heard Jason just chop up because Jason had a Prius
I
too.
thought so. Yeah, it's a great car. I mean, it's funny people knock that car. It's literally probably my favorite car I've ever owned.
Well, the Prius
Yeah,
out here in the West Coast is like the taxi, So all of us out here, we just like to pretend to be
exactly.
cabbies, We enjoy certain films, and if you grew up in Egypt, you like the Mercedes because that's the taxi,
Right.
But
Yep.
out in the Cali area, the Prius is the way. So you just know it's reliable. It's a gas and go, and it's not much gas. So
Well,
um, yeah,
that's
go
the
ahead.
other thing, like you just said, it helps the environment. So that's another reason why it goes great with veganism because if you're vegan, chances are you care about the environment as well.
No doubt. And so let me ask, and I think this question I have for you, Stephen, in relation to some of the things you already shared, and again, also I want to extend my condolences and appreciation too for your candor and sharing about your history there and really pivotal points in your life on many levels and what you've learned. And
I
it goes into
appreciate
what
it.
we're talking about with veganism and identity. We've talked about this before, changing up stereotypes, not fitting the mold. So I'm curious, being plant based for many years, I'm sure you've seen changes just in 7 years of being really committed to the process. I'm sure you've seen changes. And for me, I feel like a lot more people are talking about organics when it comes to food, eating healthy, plant based. Some of these are the catchphrases of the day. I'm from your perspective, what do you think is kind of contributing or assisting the process of people kind of moving toward a plant-based diet?
So my answer, I think, is probably going to be right in line with what your thoughts are. I think that overall, the global collective consciousness is just starting to shift. And I think that especially that partnered up with all the availability of resources that we have with social media and technology, people are able to see the impact that we're actually having on the planet and on each other and realizing that really like our resources are limited here and it's crazy that we're looking at other planets for inhabitability while we're destroying the one that we're on when the solution is really not that complicated. So I think that people are really becoming more and more aware of just how far their impact is reaching. And that if they have that ability to make a difference and, choose something that maybe at first is a little bit inconvenient, but they start to realize it becomes just as convenient once they're used to it, once they've switched over, then why not make those changes? And so I think, everybody's probably not at the point where they're ready to fully commit to something, but they're at least trying to cut back on certain things or choose X over Y when it's going to be more beneficial for others. And then also just their health. I think that this is the trickiest aspect to it, because I think with health, there's always going to be conflicting information. So I think some people try to be more health conscious, and I think that people who are more intuitive naturally with health and what should be considered healthy, they make the right choices. I think the people that are not as intuitive with health end up getting bogged down by some of the misinformation that's out there. So I think that all of those things kind of play into why we're seeing these things. Also, I think, a lot has to do with capitalism. And it's interesting because I know in the vegan community, there's a lot of hatred for capitalism. But I always encourage people to use capitalism to your advantage, because at the end of the day, really, all capitalism is seeking to make the most profits possible. Well, if you encourage businesses to make the products that are more beneficial for the planet and let them know that that's where your dollars are going to go, then we could actually be driving these, systemic changes needed through capitalism, because we will teach these businesses we're done buying these things that are destroying us.
Mm-hmm. It's a good point. Good point.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Kind of we're getting into broader topics as well, such as the environment. And that just reminded me of something, which is, I know you often, I'll just say, get a little agitated when people refer to veganism as a diet, and you kind of look at it more as a lifestyle and a philosophy and a way of thinking. So can you give us a bit more insight into that?
Yeah, so I think that's interesting, because there are a lot of people that they'll see a documentary like What the Health or Game Changers, and they'll tell everybody, I'm going vegan, and in reality it's not really true. A lot of people go plant-based, kind of as Jason talked about. Plant-based is really, the main thing with the diet, because it is just eating things that are naturally from the earth. And obviously a whole foods plant-based diet is truly like the healthiest thing you can eat, where you're not really eating all the processed things and stuff like that. So it's interesting when people say they went vegan as a diet for health, because really, like, on a vegan diet, I mean, Armand, you know this just as well as I do, and probably Jason and Tim as well. We can eat donuts, we can eat Oreos, we can eat, cupcakes, cakes, cookies, whatever. Like, there's vegan everything now. So there's plenty of unhealthy vegan food. Really, what is healthy is plant-based. The difference being that veganism truly comes from the idea of wanting to remove as much exploitation and suffering of other living beings as we can. It doesn't mean that you're going to be perfect. It doesn't mean that there aren't some aspects that maybe you don't know about, where there's still, animals being exploited. Obviously, in modern day society, there are certain things that are completely out of our control, where animals are being harmed and we might not even know about it. But the idea is that in all aspects of your life, you seek to eliminate that if you can. And so, to me, that is the biggest difference, is that when someone goes vegan for diet, really it's not encompassing this whole ideology of removing suffering from animals in general. It's just not eating meat, dairy, and eggs. So that's the thing, is it causes a little bit of, I guess, just like, people are not really aware of that, the whole term of veganism and how far reaching it is.
Yeah, jumping in there,
True
Stephen.
that. I think even I'll go.
Yeah, quickly.
No, go ahead, Jason. You good?
Just briefly commenting on that. How usually I find, I agree, and me myself, I'm not a real having deep dive into veganism, the philosophy. However, in my experience in life and just trying new things, I've definitely learned and walked that path for some time. And it seems to me, in general, things we do or things we hear, especially that encompass like a wider range of philosophy or rationality, deeper history, we usually don't but scratch the surface when we hear a term like vegan, or even something like yoga, or even something like Buddhism. It's a deep process by which people really make a choices on how to live. So I just wanted to comment on that. And when we think about investigation, right, when we think about our own journey and our own walk, we're talking about identity a little bit and breaking stereotypes. I think we have to really kind of explore for ourselves some of the nuances of things. And just because it makes some headline or it sounds a certain way, although it has its merit too. A lot of these kind of the way people live usually is quite thoughtful, and there's a history there that it's worth learning about, regardless whether we choose to make similar life choices or not. I think in the learning, we can start to understand, and much like Stephen was talking about, kind of empathizing with life and creatures. It's like we can empathize with other living beings, although traditionally we might have been used to treating those other beings for ourselves in selfish ways. It's possible to change that with a little bit of time and a little bit of education, it seems to me. So
Yeah,
that's
I
all I
agree.
wanted to share there.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of echo on that too, is that kind of going back to Armand, your original question as well, is, and that's where I don't really necessarily expect everybody to go vegan for the same reasons I did. Because like Armand said, I went vegan for very emotional reasons. And because I am truly an empath, where I can feel that suffering on a very deep level. So I am completely understanding, that a lot of people are going to maybe go vegan, really plant-based, for health reasons, or, whatever else that is going to benefit them. And then the way I see it is, it's now job of the activist to kind of show them the other side, and, the other benefits of being vegan, like fully vegan, and that impact that it has on the animals and the planet and everything else. Because if they already see that they can be vegan and be healthy, then it just is more encouragement on that right path, even if it didn't start with the animals.
I hear that.
Tim, did you also want to chime in?
I just definitely misinformation. I wouldn't mind having, vegan classrooms like early in our society, teaching generations of kids about these different lifestyles and going into it. That would be nice, because, we're really
Yeah.
not learning anywhere but what we watch on TV and hear on the radio and stuff. And there's a lot of misinformation. I like how you brought
Well,
up masculinity earlier,
yeah.
because masculinity plays a huge role as well. I didn't even think about that. There is this attitude towards veganism where it's just, oh, leaves and plants weak. No, eat your meat. I was
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, that plays a huge role. I mean, we talk about mask wearing and statistics out there saying that men are less likely to wear it because of
Ego.
masculinity.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
I'm saying? And it's just like, oh Jesus, like every turn of each new day, there's an example of just how entrenched masculinity is into so many
Yeah.
aspects of our life. But
Yeah.
I just thought that was interesting.
Well, it's interesting too, you bring up the misinformation again, because I would love to see vegan classrooms as well, or at least some kind of health training earlier on in life, because that's the other crazy thing, is that I don't think a lot of people realize how entrenched our government is with all of the misinformation. Because the people that are funding, for instance, like our food pyramid and the food training that we actually do get, it's all this big animal agriculture industry. So literally the very people that are selling us meat and dairy and eggs are the same people telling the government this is what we should be eating. And they're able to do that through different funding mechanisms and things like that, where the government gives them that spotlight. So it's really crazy when you think about, especially because a lot of these products, they're actually killing us. So these very businesses that we're buying products from, we're basically paying them to kill us over time.
Big time. Big time. Totally agree. And nothing ever
Yeah.
painfully resembles that, than now with all the
Right.
misinformation going around. Well, for any viewers who watches politics, it's just each day is just one piece of lie after another, and
Yeah.
it's just crazy.
Well, and even with the pandemic, though, it's interesting because whichever political side someone's on now, which is crazy that it's even a political thing. I mean, it's really crazy that that's what it's come to. But whatever your views are on it, it's interesting because really nobody is publicly talking about health in general and how you can actually help your immune system to even fight this thing to begin with, because if you have a healthy immune system you're in a better chance to fight it. But nobody talks about the fact that our diet is literally killing 1 in 4 Americans.
Exactly.
600,000 people a year are going to die from heart disease. That's crazy. Like when you think about the level of action that's been taken even on the pandemic, but nothing is ever done about the fact that we've got 600,000 people dying every year from heart disease, which is something that's fully preventable. That's mind blowing when you think about it. And that's when you realize how embedded this industry is with our government. And if you guys want to, we can get into it. But that's the same reason that I ended up backing out of the FBI when I did.
Yeah, that's very fascinating.
Oh,
for sure.
definitely have plans.
Okay,
I
Armand, you're
definitely
going to talk about it later?
gonna speak about your journey into the. Yeah, for sure. I just want to back us up a little bit, going into the whole veganism as a diet versus veganism as a philosophy, and kind of just speaking to my own experience. And I think almost inherently, veganism starts out as something else than just a diet, because you have to make the choice and make the decision to go vegan, which already means that you had to think about it. It was a process in your mind before it ever became actions in your life. And I went vegan 4 years ago, back in March of 2016. And it was during the time of the Baha'i fast, which we're all familiar with here. And it's a time that's supposed to encourage heightened spiritual perception. And I don't exactly remember what the specific thing was. I remember watching a speech on YouTube, but I can't for the life of me remember if it was right before I went vegan, which would kind of give evidence to it being the catalyst, or right after I went vegan. Point being, I just remember reflecting and thinking like, there's not too many things in this life that you get to choose. You don't get to choose what sex you are. You don't get to choose what circumstances you're born into, your family members, your socioeconomic environment. You don't even get to choose your damn name. There's very few things in this life that are truly in our control. And it's kind of makes you feel like you really lack agency in this life. So I was thinking like, wow, it seems like something as important as to what you put into your body every single day is something that should have been a conscious decision on your part. But when you think about it, it's not.
Right.
We are conditioned, regardless of what that food is, to eat what's given to us by our family, by our school, and by the society we live in. And that's not your choice. And then because people don't ever really grow up challenging anything about their life, you're probably just going to have that same diet until the day you die. But for me, it's like, I want to decide what I want to eat for myself. And that's when I started to really question why I had the diet that I had. And I started to do more research. And then I decided being vegan was the best choice for me. And yes, that became a change in my diet, but it was more like a thought experiment for me. And for me, it's also, again, more of a philosophy than just a diet, because, when I started to think about everything in regard to veganism, like, okay, from a health perspective, I think that this is the healthiest decision to make, right? Both because of things just intuitively, it seemed like we're supposed to be plant-based, but also just all the research and the science out there. It seems like we're supposed to be vegan. For example, all the carnivores out there in the wild, in the natural environment, tigers, lions, bears, etc., they don't need to cook their food. No animal that eats meat needs to cook their food. Humans, we have to cook it, process it before it becomes safe for us to consume. It's like, okay, like, it doesn't seem like that's naturally just what we eat. Number two, this is also more into the science behind it. Again, things like our digestional tracts being the same length as other herbivores, the enzymes in our saliva being, excuse me, specifically designed to like break down stuff as we continuously chew with the type of teeth that we have that are meant for chewing. People like to say, look at these canines. Those are not canines. Those are
Yeah,
meant to
no.
crack nuts and seeds.
Right.
Go look at a dog or a lion or tiger and you'll see a nice pair of canines, right? Like, okay, it seems like biologically, again, all the evidence out there, you see how how unhealthy Americans are, how much we struggle with obesity, how much we struggle with cardiovascular disease. So it's pretty clear that we don't really know what we're doing in terms of health. So I'm like, okay, so it just seems like from the health perspective, it makes more sense. And then number two, I'm not you, Stephen. Like, you know me, I'm not an animal lover. I don't have like a real emotional connection with animals. But that doesn't mean that just because I'm not an animal person or I don't feel that intimate bond with animals, that I can't recognize oppression when I see it. And when you think about the animal agriculture industry and factory farming, and you find out things like, we kill over 8 billion land animals a year
No,
to
way more than
supply
that.
for our food supply and
Yeah.
no, in America,
In
sorry,
America,
in
yeah.
America. That's yeah, America, which comes out to something like 223 million, I think it is, animals a day. I'm like, people call vegans extreme, but that seems pretty extreme to me, to do something that's not necessary for our health, that causes the suffering of other sentient beings. Look, I know some people, vegans, argue this. To me, it doesn't really matter. I know someone like you views animals as equal to humans, and other people view humans above animals. But I think everyone can agree that animals obviously have emotions, and animals can obviously feel pain. So they're at the very least sentient on that level. And it's like, to cause this to them, especially when we like to consider ourselves as progressive people, as a spiritual and divine society, I'm like, doesn't isn't evidence of your divinity based off how you treat those at your mercy? And looking at how we treat animals, that's just it's oppression in its highest form. So it's like, okay, like, I don't want to have to participate in a process like that unless it's absolutely necessary. And then thinking about the environment, again, there's so many facts and statistics out there. It's like, oh, all the emissions released by animal agriculture in the world releases more greenhouse emissions than all the transportation in the world combined. And obviously, we know global warming is a huge issue in the world, and just the destruction of our environment in general, which which animal agriculture and the animal industry has a huge hand to play in, such as deforestation in the Amazon and across the world. So I'm like, wow, it doesn't really seem like being vegan has a lot of drawbacks, and it seems like our current norm and the way we approach food seems to be doing a lot of damage, not only to ourselves but to other sentient beings and to our world and our environment. So I'm like, man, if I recognize all this, I don't want the only thing preventing me from adopting this lifestyle is because I lack the willpower or the discipline to make a change, because I'm very big on that, and I think it's something in Western society where hedonism and doing everything in excess, willpower and discipline is not something that's really talked about or encouraged. So I'm like, yeah, I don't want to be a slave to tradition or habit or convenience. So I think I have it in me to make this change. So just for me, you can clearly see that was like a lot of thought that went into making this change, and it wasn't necessarily just like, oh, I want to change my diet. Oh yeah, I think I'll be vegan today. So I always kind of understand how you get a bit frustrated when people say, oh, veganism is just a diet. I'm like, I don't really think it's just a diet. I think it's like, again, a way of life and a way of thinking.
Yeah, I mean, you hit on so many important points, but just like going to your last thing you said about like the hedonism and lacking the willpower, I liken it to the ultimate form of gluttony. And it's interesting that, in certain religions, gluttony is considered, one of the worst sins. And you think about it, what worse form of gluttony than you're literally choosing taste buds over life? Because that's what it boils down to. Because like you said, the science of our bodies and our biology and everything shows that we are not meant to eat these animals. Yes, we can eat them, but it goes back to the idea of a machine. You can put certain types of fuel in a car, but it might not be the optimal fuel for it. Your car's still going to run, But over time, it's going to get worse and worse, and it's going to start to wear the car down more and more, similar to our bodies. It's found that people on vegan diets do not age as rapidly as people that are eating animal-based products because of certain chemical compounds and the makeup of them within our bodies that creates an acidic environment where our body ages faster. All of these things, the cardiovascular, like you talked about, the 600,000 people a year that are dying from heart disease, so many other things. And when you realize that it literally just comes down to what you said, willpower over what you're eating, it's crazy to think that a lot of us just keep eating these things and don't question it. So yeah, I totally agree with you.
Yeah, I was gonna just jump in on that note, Stephen. Willpower, discipline. It seems like in society, at least in the West, we have a lot of convenience, we have a lot of comfort, and even like our habits, even habits that aren't to our overall benefit. Maybe they benefit a few spots on our tongue, but they don't benefit much else. The fact that these kinds of things happen, they really kind of have a great impact on a lot of the choices we make. I'm constantly reflecting about something around eating plant-based, or the mentality of nonviolence, non-harmful action. Because when we talk about veganism from that standpoint, it reminds me of some training that I had with yoga and some of the niyamas and the yamas. These were like ways of life and philosophy, and one of them is ahimsa, which is nonviolence.
Right. Yep.
And so for me, what was interesting about my experience with plant-based foods, it had a lot to do with discipline first for me, because being involved with fitness, growing up, being, self-identifying as an athlete, I love to just use the body. So I always looking for ways to help the body recover, be more effective. And anyway, along the path, plant-based foods came in as a way of recovery, as a way of just clarity. The body always felt a little more limber, little fresher. I always felt just more fresh when I switched to like mostly even raw foods, but not entirely, but a lot of fruits and plant-based foods. So that was like the first experiment. But more importantly, at least for me, and we've had these conversations before, the sort of existential exploration, what is life in its various facets. So for me, I was always interested in how are people, say, expanding consciousness, awareness, becoming more clear about what's happening in life, seeing life for what it is a little more than through our lens of various life circumstances, histories, cognitive processes, all that stuff, but moving kind of past that and just seeing life for what it is. All the people I saw who are living like that really were eating simply and eating just plant-based typically. Even like inventors and things, when I think about Nikola Tesla, it was known he ate like oatmeal once a day, and that was like the extent of his nutrition. And the guy was really dedicated to his exploration of scientific reality. So he kind of focused his energy on that, and he knew that getting good nutrition and simple nutrition would be the best for his pursuit, because he didn't want to be bogged down by the digesting of all this food and complexity of food. And if we look at the molecular structure of animal-based composition, it's very similar to the human. It takes a long time for the human digestional tract to process such a complex, organism, whereas the plants are very simple. So Tesla knew that. He knew his mind would be sharper. He knew his sort of his process by which he was discovering things would be a little bit more open when he was eating simpler. So he's one example. Some of the people that I studied in the yogic practice, from Patanjali's sutras and the yogic kind of community, very much plant-based, very simple eaters. So maybe that's a question I have for us here, which is what are some of those experiences we had when we made those shifts in our perception of life and our perception of reality, as as a piece of life versus like I'm an individual, I'm this, I'm Jason, I'm from here, but more so like a connection. We made a connection in a wider way. I'm curious if we have any experiences like that we were willing to share.
It's interesting you bring that up because that's literally where I wanted to go with this based on what you were saying, because it's interesting how the word you used when you said you started eating more plant-based was fresher, like you just felt fresher. And it takes it to this level where I always tell people you probably have never thought of your food this way because you think of it as a purely physical thing. But we are energetic beings. And so, really, what you're eating when you're eating anything, whether it's an animal product, or a plant based product, you're eating energy. So, you're making the choice every time you put food in your mouth, whether you're eating death and torture or life and abundance. And so, you have to think and take a step back and look at the life of that animal you're consuming and think about the months it spent caged in something that it couldn't even move in, the people that would beat it, all these horrific things that we now know are common practice in these industries, and then violently killed in a very excruciating, painful way, and terrifying because they see it happening to all the other animals around them before it even happens to them. And as Armand mentioned earlier, these are sentient beings. They understand full well what's happening. So when we're eating that food, it's literally not only rotting flesh that we're eating all of that negative energy that is now built into that flesh and the life of suffering that we inflicted on that other sentient living being. Or you can make the simple choice to eat a fruit or a vegetable. And I feel like that results in that feeling of feeling fresher because, as you were alluding to in your question, we are all connected. Like, we are all part of one massive energy source. And when you realize that, you can see why somebody who is an empath suffers when they see one of these living beings suffering, because that is part of your energy, just not directly in your body, but the more abstract, where that energy is still part of you, it's just a little bit disconnected. And so I think when you make that realization and you connect it to your food choices, you start to feel like more fresh, more alive, more energetic, because you are consuming life instead of the other negative energies that were inflicted on these other living beings.
Yeah, thank you for that.
One other thing I wanted to ask you, Stephen, because it's something that you that you brought up a lot. I feel like when you were helping me in my transition is, how do you feel being someone who feels as strongly as you do about veganism and about animal welfare when you have loved ones, such as family and friends, that pretty much aren't vegan and they have a pretty normal lifestyle in regard to what they eat and the things they utilize for their benefit or for their necessities, such as products and clothing?
Yeah, I think as an activist, that's probably one of the hardest things to deal with, just because, especially when you're a public activist on social media, where you have a very public persona, it's almost just very disappointing, when you've got family members that still are not vegan, or, don't really subscribe to that philosophy. It's especially tough when you see those people suffering physically from different ailments and things that would be better off if they would just commit to it. It's easy to see why they don't, because of all the brainwashing that we have throughout our lives and the misinformation. It gets to a point where they feel like that's just another lie, it's not really going to work. So it's tricky, but I guess for me, realistically, it's just like every day I hope I can have a little bit more of an impact and just be an example and kind of help show them the way. I don't expect everybody to be at the level that I'm at, where I feel such a strong connection for these animals. But I think what is the hardest aspect to deal with is when you have family and friends around you that they are very in tune with a lot of things. They might be spiritual, they might be very intelligent, all of these different aspects that are admirable. You know that they wouldn't want oppression of any other human. So, going back to my childhood, we would go to a lot of race day unity parades, things like that, fighting for racial justice, gender, equality, all of these different things. And to know that like these same people that understand those concepts perfectly well cannot understand that they're still exploiting other living beings and oppressing other living beings in such a horrific way. I mean, it's unprecedented, really. Like when you think about in human terms, no humans have ever been oppressed to the level that we've subjected animals to. We kill over 74 billion land animals per year. We kill trillions of sea life per year to the point they can't even measure it in units. It has to be measured in tons. We're destroying all of these ecosystems. When we breathe, 5 to 8 out of 10 breaths that we breathe come from the ocean. We're destroying the ocean to the point that soon we might not have that oxygen coming from the ocean anymore because of what we're doing with our fishing industries and all these different things. And so it's sometimes just hard to accept that somebody can see one blatant form of oppression and torture and just exploitation and not really make the connection. So yeah, it's something that I still struggle with every day.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that too, Stephen. As you're sharing, and I'm thinking about the journey of life and journey of awareness, like that empathy you're talking about. You shared it so simply and truly, which is, yeah, how is it that we can think about justice in a certain way when it comes to humans, and which is wonderful, and thank God people are doing that.
Right, right.
And at
Yeah,
the same
not to
time,
take away from that. Right. Yeah.
right, right. But yeah, how do we miss it with other creatures? And many folks kind of understand that conceptually too with pets. And when if you ask about eating a dog, in America, people would kind of get taken aback in a strong way, like, "Wow, what are you talking about?"
They will
Right.
lose
Yeah.
their shit.
Yep.
Right, exactly. So if you're talking, I think humanity can understand the concept. So I agree. There's a huge sort of psychological. I don't know. I don't want to I'm not a person who can diagnose anything. So let me not
The
say.
like cognitive dissonance or like a dissociation.
Yeah, I'm with
Yeah.
you. Cognitive dissonance
Yeah.
for sure, right? So I'm understanding that as well, and maybe the way I kind of try to look at it is like these little ones. I'm with, a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old, and I'm looking at them, and I'm like, they're in a process of learning, and it's on their time. We can accompany that, we can support that. We do a lot. We have to give a lot, and in time, they'll be better for it. They're still going to make their own choices. So I think sometimes I think about our philosophies or our ways of life that, like we're sharing, are really universal and beneficial in a lot of ways. There's really just a mental hang up and maybe a taste bud hang up for a moment. And beyond that, though, it's like this is all for the benefit of everything and everyone. It's curious that jump for adults might not happen sooner, yet maybe this is the caveat, and I would like to hear maybe from Tim too on this, which is how food is so specific to culture, to our beliefs, to our identity. So maybe, as we talk about it clearly from the plant-based, or rather the vegan perspective, what does it look like, from maybe some of our upbringings, our childhood, our history? So, because that could inform us, right? If we're trying to make changes, we might want to start with where we're coming from and what our influences are. So I kind of want to pass it to Tim and see if Tim want to speak on some of your kind of family, how was in your family, and how are you raised around thinking about food?
Yeah, totally. You know, I guess I can't speak for a lot of Black people or Black culture, but you know, we our food and what we eat has cultural history. You know, going back to what was fed to us as slaves us in earlier centuries, as well as going back to earlier talking about the motherland and stuff. There's culture foods that Africans had brought over from the motherland when they first arrived here, yams and such, as well as knowledge on how to plant food as well. But one thing that stuck out to me as listening to all this, and this goes back to what Armand was saying a little bit, is I was just curious of how your vegan lifestyle has served you in a personal way, as far as like an advantage or disadvantage, or have you had issues in, say, like your relationships, like romantic relationships? Has your lifestyle come up as a sort of block for other people in getting close to you?
Yeah, so I guess let me address both things, like kind of going to what Jason was saying first about the diets and culture and things like that. It's interesting because even looking back, a lot of us were taught that, our ancient ancestors, they ate a certain way, which comprised of a lot of meat. And now even what studies are showing when they're looking at the bones of our ancient ancestors is that a vegan diet is actually closer to like a diet in the Paleolithic age than what the current paleo diet looks like, which is really interesting. But then culturally, you have to look at too, like that's another form of oppression when it comes to Black people, is they're being taught that these are the foods that you're supposed to eat, these are the foods that your people ate, and all of these things, when in reality these are foods that are, it's another form of oppression, a way of killing Black people through their mouths, which I actually have a friend who's in the process of making a documentary that should be released later this year called "They're Trying to Kill Us." And it
Nice.
should, yeah, it should be really interesting because he's talking about all these various forms of oppression against Black people. And I know just the other day I saw he had met with Michael Brown's father, and so he's doing all these interviews and all these things, and so it's going to be interesting to see that film when it comes out. But you look at food deserts and the foods that are even available in socially or like socioeconomically disadvantaged areas. It's a lot of it is food that will kill people. It's not healthy fruits and vegetables and things like this that would give them a better, healthier life. So it is very interesting to see how that stuff plays out. um, but then going to your question, Tim, so personally, I feel like the benefits I've gotten from veganism have just been astronomical. As far as health, I think Armand could speak to that too. Like, I feel stronger in the gym now than I ever did when I was younger. As I'm getting older, I'm 34 now, and there are most exercises in the gym. I can lift more now than I did when I was 21 years old and pumped full of testosterone. And I was, back then I was using pre-workouts. I drank caffeine all the time, all these things. And now I don't touch caffeine. I never drink caffeine. I don't use pre-workouts, nothing. I just feel more energy throughout the day. It's more even throughout the day. There's not these spikes and drops. Um, just health wise, like I feel great. And then relationship wise, I would say like that is one of the struggles of veganism. And it's funny because a lot of times people ask, where do vegans get their protein from? And the joke on the vegan side is, it's not the protein we're worried about, it's where do we get our patients from? Because it's, people always asking that question, and these various questions that I don't think people necessarily mean in a certain way. I think it's just when you hear it so many times, it's like, please look at the research. But relationships are tougher because, and I'll go into something else after this, but they're tougher just because you're having to hold people around you to a higher standard. And a lot of people don't want to be held to a high standard. So it's just one more thing. And so I guess I'll ask you this question that will kind of help you relate, I think, is how would you feel about trying to date people that were racist.
Right, right.
It's tough, because it's something that fundamentally is very deep, and that you care so much about, that it's hard to kind of make sacrifices in that area. But at the same time, you feel like, you are needing to help people in a certain way. Like, you can't be closed off from people. If we're not accessible, like if someone asks me questions and I'm like, I don't want to talk to you, you're not vegan, then I'm not helping anybody. So there's kind of a give and take where, a lot of times if I'm dating someone that's not vegan, it won't go very far, but it's usually predicated on their reception of something. And if they're really at that awakening moment where they're willing to look into it more, if they're willing to look into it, then I think most people, they'll start to go down that path. But if they're not, then realistically, it goes a lot deeper than veganism, I think, because if you're not willing to even question something like this that's going to have such a profound impact on your life, then really, like, is this someone that I want to spend my journey on, with? Because at the end of the day, I want to be with someone that's going to challenge me just as much as I challenge them. And I want to grow with that person. I don't want to feel like one of us is just stuck at a certain point and we're not ever trying to do anything to progress. So I think, in a way, like going back to what I was saying, where I want to hit on something after saying it's a little bit of a challenge, is that it's actually, in a way, kind of a blessing, because it's almost like another filtering mechanism where you don't end up wasting your time with people that are not necessarily trying to improve and, further their spiritual well-being and things like that.
Yeah, 100% agree. Because, like you just said, I think it touched on what we were saying earlier too with discipline. If someone isn't willing to try to do some discipline for themselves, to challenge themselves, then it seems like, it's not worth giving a lot of time. So I agree that, like, for me, when I think about nutrition, just from that standpoint, when I think about nonviolence, when I think about environment and, the oneness of our planet and life, if I was with somebody who was unwilling to kind of change choices on food and other living things, how to live, consumer
Right.
goods, like, yeah, that's just like, that's no go always.
Right.
Like, sadly for some people, but I think every human being has the capacity to expand and grow, and obviously in their own way. So can't put expectations on the time of it all, but
Right.
I think it's fair to expect growth in a partnership, especially just like we do with children, right? We expect growth, and we got to hold children accountable so that they do grow. And it happens a lot naturally too, but there has to be guidance and orderliness for it all to really kind of function at its best, if you ask me. And nutrition is going to be a key feature of that. And like we're saying, its impact goes well beyond the body. It goes into so much of life. So yeah, it's interesting to see how this, for some people, is not even something that they're thinking about, and for some of us, we're very much thinking about how much of an impact that's going to be. So that brings me to another question, which has to go back to culture. So Stephen, you're hypothetically now. So, if this makes you uncomfortable, don't feel obligated to answer. But you're dating a woman from a culture in which her family is very much meat is part of the cultural norm, due to their hunting kind of culture, right? It's in the history. Perhaps you could say it's an indigenous person of this nation. That's part of how they survive. And it's still very much part of the culture. They're doing, having ceremony and having sheep and slaughtering sheep and providing food for the community, etc. in that way. What is your take on that? Obviously, you can just share your personal view on it. What's your take on it? Say, if you were dating a woman in which that was going to be a norm, and maybe she said, well, if we get married, I expect you to do this ceremony and I need you to slaughter these sheep. And learn about this. You have any immediate thoughts on that? I know it's kind of loaded and hypothetical,
No,
but
no.
I'm just curious how you're going to respond.
I think
I can answer
Armand
that
knows my
question
answer.
for
Yeah,
Stephen. I'm
yeah,
gonna be the mouthpiece.
yeah.
Yeah, I can be the mouthpiece. Dude, when I was living with Stephen in Washington, this guy would give me the side eye if I killed a mosquito. I'm like, bro, relax, okay? This guy is the type of, oh, come here, little spider. Let me get you in a cup and put you outside. This dude's not killing no sheep no time soon.
Yeah, I was
No
gonna
time at
say
all.
Armand. I was gonna say that the change in Armand from a diet to a lifestyle was I don't kill bugs anymore. Instead, I scream, Steven, I need you. And then I come and get him, take him outside. Yeah,
Exactly,
you know,
exactly. Because I'm like, I feel so guilty whenever that would happen. Oh, sorry. I was
yeah.
just saying I would feel guilty. I'd be getting ready to like smash the life out of a cockroach or no anything that was just in our apartment. And then I would go. I'm like, God damn it! Like Steven's like looking over me, over my shoulder in my head. I'm like, Steven.
Yeah, I mean, I can't kill it's interesting because it goes back to what we talked about as far as valuing life, and it's the way I see it now is even I'll be driving and I'll see a tiny little lizard in the road and I'll literally slam on the brakes and look to make sure the little guy got out of the road before I keep driving, because I feel like it's the least I can do. Like, this little creature is living his or her life the same way I am. And I mean, imagine if there were just these giant beings that were bigger than us that did similar things. It's almost like a hurricane or a tornado. So if I can take my, extra 5 seconds and spare that life, like, I feel like it's the least I can do. So then when it comes to like actually intentionally killing another living being, it's something that I don't have in me, because even someone who is my enemy, I don't think I could even strike. It's something that's crazy. It's like I could be enraged. I think the only time I could even hurt somebody is defending another. So if I saw an animal maybe being, attacked, or another person being attacked, then I could jump into action and take the necessary, steps. But to do something like that, where, like, a girl is saying essentially, if we get married, you're going to need to do this, then I mean, it would just be an instant no for me right from the bat, because it would mean to me that, number one, you don't even value me and what I stand for, because for you to ask something like that of me just to be married to me would mean that, like, you literally are wanting me to sacrifice something that I stand so strongly in. But also, I think, like, it would it would instantly turn me off to that woman in general, just because to know that she would want me to take the life of another living being, and for that energy to be the start of our marriage, it's the same thing I think of when I think of funerals and how hypocritical it is, and it's just conflicting, where you've got a funeral where it's a bunch of people mourning the death of another person, but then the reception is all meat. And it's just like, you can't help but think, like, here we are being reverent and celebrating the life of one person by eating maybe 30 slaughtered animals. And I think it goes back to the whole argument that certain people make, even as far as, well, the cavemen, and it goes back to what you touched on, actually, Jason, with like Tesla and the future and things like this, is, when do we stop allowing people's old customs to dictate what happens in the world and start focusing on what the future needs? Because at the end of the day, we can all point to a
Great point.
custom, or a historical thing that, when we're kids, there are a lot of things that are kind of ingrained in us. Like, you might see chicken wings and you're like, man, I remember that summer with my grandma when I was like 6 years old, and like when I eat chicken wings, it takes me back to that time, but we have to get to a point where we realize, like, it's not fair to sacrifice another animal for us to accomplish that. And it's not me, trying to force my beliefs on, another culture. It's just, I don't believe any living being deserves exploitation and oppression just for a cultural norm.
Yeah,
True
one thing I
that.
just want to say
So,
before maybe we can segue
oh,
into the FBI. I'll go ahead, Jason.
Well, I was going to just then caveat it, but I think we can segue it.
Yeah, I was just thinking as soon as Jason asked that question, I'm like, nah, dog. Steven's gonna ramble in that piece, and he's gonna be like, bah, bah, be free, little sheep.
Yeah. Yeah, I would yeah. I mean, and that's one of those like tricky areas. So it's interesting you brought it up because it is like that's one of the more delicate areas, because especially when it is something that is so, ingrained and I do think that as far as reverence and respecting animals and things like that, I think like indigenous people, they do at least value the life of these animals a lot more than the typical person. And I think, there were periods of time where they definitely needed these animals to survive, and I don't know that they necessarily needed to kill them. I think back in the day, when we weren't so overpopulated, there might have been enough animals that would just die of natural causes. They could use whatever they needed. But I think at this day and age, it's just, at what point do we keep holding on to these old things to, just keep the traditions going?
Yeah, the last thing I wanted to say before we segued, just because I don't know when it came up in the conversation, it was just a thought I had about how vegans get labeled as judgy a lot. And you know me, Stephen, I'm not like, I don't really mess with vegans like that, bro. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, outside of you, I can count on my hand how many other vegan friends I have. So that aside, I think it's like no one would say I think most people, if they had a loved one, family friend, whatever, significant other, they like smoked cigarettes or did something that was clearly detrimental to their health, no one would say like, oh, stop trying to push your agenda on me, getting me to try to stop smoking cigarettes, right? They would understand that obviously this person wants what's best for
Right.
you, and they're trying to get you to stop doing something that's detrimental to your health. Likewise, when vegans try to get people to, again, think more consciously about what they eat and maybe make a lifestyle change, it's not because we're trying to push an agenda. I don't know what said agenda would even be if we did have some like nefarious
Yeah,
intentions, what it would
propaganda.
be,
It's
like the
it's
secret
like
hidden
right.
yeah, vegan propaganda. Like what are we trying to do? Like not like have our generations after us face like habitat destruction and
Right.
like not even be able to live properly in society because what we're doing is going to cause like a hellacious world for them. But it's like because we care, obviously, and we want to see you thrive, and we feel like something we feel so strongly about and we believe and know to be the truth, we don't want people we love and care about to like not be in line with that. So it's pretty simple. So yeah, I just never understood that. Even when that's why I respect my brother in a lot of ways in regard to this. Like my brother doesn't trip or like try to hold on to anything. Like my brother is not vegan. Not he's the complete utter opposite of a vegan, right? But whenever he's like present in these conversations, he's like, why y'all trying to defend yourselves? Just accept the fact that you like living this way and you're not ready to make a change. Like, what are you trying to defend? You know? And I think it's and that's how I was too, kind of growing up. Like before I even knew all the facts and science behind everything, I'm just like, yeah, that's cool. Like you're vegan, and that sounds about right. But I'll go ahead and eat my ribs now. Peace,
Yeah.
bro.
Yeah.
Like but it's like I wasn't like trying to hold on to any facet of truth in the way I was living. I just knew that I wasn't ready to make any change, and I wasn't thinking like that
Yep.
yet. But
Yeah.
anyway, so yeah, going to the potential special agent Rykwalder conversation again. I know we're going to segue into the vegan stuff. Yeah, why don't that be kind of like the final thing we talk about?
Okay, yeah. So the FBI thing, it's interesting because it started from the same thing that ended up causing me to go vegan, which was the death of my sister. So probably the semester after she died, the FBI Human Resources came to my college and they were talking to us about career paths into the FBI and that accounting is actually the second biggest field they recruit from for special agents and all these things that, at the time I was like, wow, I really want to go into something where I can try to cause a change in the justice system. So I was like, this is perfect. So from that point forward, for about the next 11 years, I had focused my whole career on it. Started working with a professional fight team in Tampa at one point, like all of these things just to stay in peak physical condition. My career, try to do everything the best I could, take all the steps I needed, check in with them periodically to make sure I'm on the right track. And then finally, after 11 years, started going through the process. Every phase of the process I expected to fail out. I was like, there's no way I'm going to pass this. And soon enough, I got the conditional offer about a year later, actually. So about a year of going through all this stuff, I got the conditional offer letter. And I waited till the last day to accept because I started having certain reservations about just the government and the way this role was going to play out. And I was researching in the FBI archives and started finding just how contradicting certain laws were. And it was the moment when I really finally realized and everything just clicked how much our government has a hand in what we're eating and, just to everybody's detriment. And that the food industry is basically controlling our government. And what I found was that in the FBI archives, they consider animal rights activists to be one of the largest terror threats in the country, right next to the Ku Klux Klan, which, if you know anything about animal rights activists, they're all about what Jason was talking about earlier with ahimsa and, not wanting to harm others. It's the whole idea of veganism is not to exploit and oppress others. Sure, there might be some animal rights activists that get a little bit carried away and they might do whatever they need, any means necessary to rescue animals. They'll break in places, and if they have to kill somebody, they will. I would say that's probably almost non-existent. As far as most situations, animal rights activists are trying to defend life and save life, which is the furthest thing from a terrorist. And, so I found this law that's called the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act of 2006. And what that law seeks to do is penalize animal rights activists to the furthest extent of the law. Prison, in like a federal prison, up to 10 years for the loss of any revenue to an animal agriculture business. So if you cost maybe an animal agriculture business like Tyson Foods, let's say, one of the largest producers of chicken products, if you cost them even maybe $100, then you could go to federal prison for 10 years. And then on the flip side, this was during a time where they were trying to pass a law to make it a Class A felony if you abuse the companion animal, so like a dog or a cat. And so it was just interesting because a Class A felony would mean you'd be treated similarly as someone who raped somebody or killed somebody. And so I just couldn't get past the fact that we literally have a law that imprisons somebody for up to 10 years for trying to save an animal, not a cat or a dog, but then someone who abuses a cat or a dog also goes to jail for maybe 10 years. And it just was two totally conflicting things that just made it very apparent what the root cause was. And the root cause is who is funding the creation of our laws. Obviously, the animal agriculture industry has heavy lobbying to where they can affect changes in the laws that benefit them and protect them from the people that don't want that kind of business to exist anymore. And when I realized that, it just reached a point where I knew that this was not an organization that I could work for anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And the reason why I say that ties into, your veganism is because, I think being vegan set you on a path where you just looked and perceived life a certain way. And it's just, I like people at the end of the day, regardless of what they do believe, they practice with what they preach. And I used to see you, running and sprinting, doing your physical training. And I know wanting to be a special agent is something that you worked hard for years. I don't know if it was like 6, 7, but it was a long
12,
period of time.
12.
And the fact that once you, excuse me, there you go, 12. So then when, you finally had that opportunity knocking on your door and you could have become a special agent, you're like, actually, no, I don't think this really aligns with my belief. And it was a huge sacrifice. So, kudos to you for that.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
I don't know if, no doubt. Jason, I don't know if you have any final words yourself.
Well, definitely want to say thanks to Stephen for Stephen, your candor, your ability to really stay like how am I trying to say it? Your ability to kind of address the various things that we were talking about and express yourself clearly, it really shows your level of commitment to it, as well as, clearly your education. And it was a pleasure to hear your story. And thank you for staying with it, man. It seems like you got a lot of great things going on, and wish you all the best and absolute blessings and support for you.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me.
And for myself, see, we didn't really get to get into it, but you were instrumental in my journey as a vegan. You made things so much easier for me, both on the food side of it, the thought behind everything, as well as how the gym, because I kind of like started really hitting the gym and becoming vegan at the same time. So again, you're an immensely important piece in my journey in that. So I appreciate you that. I appreciate you for being there for me during that time. And as you already know, you're a brother for life. But other than that, you know how this goes, guys. It's time to wrap it up and put a bow on it. So thank you to everyone who's listening from their cars, rooms, jobs, or wherever the heck you may be. It doesn't really matter, because the point is that we appreciate you. And Tim, if you're ready, I guess that's your cue to go ahead and do your thing.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to go ahead and end this with one of my writings. It's our intent at the end of every episode to incorporate something deep and profound that resonates with our guest, with the topic at hand and with our audience as well. Dear Stephen, separated by experiences, luck, and purpose, it never ceases to amaze me how similar and connected we all are despite all this. Humanity has made progress in steps and strides over many millennia towards consciousness. And despite that, it still feels like we haven't even got started. So whether that progress looks like scripture, evolution, or survival human continuity, I just want to thank you here and now for sharing with us your life and time, if not a reason for all of us to change and grow post haste. Myself, Armand, and Jason, and our viewers would like to thank you for everything today. We wish you love, peace, safety, and good health.
Thank you all.
Until next time, everybody. Peace out.